Okay, so thanks everybody for coming along today. It's nice to see so many people here. So as Clive has said, we're going to talk about this elusive, ephemeral word, serendipity. It's been well documented in history of discovery and innovations, especially in science, and so there are some really prominent examples. I'm sure you can all recall penicillin being one, the discovery of penicillin being one. Serendipity doesn't exist just on its own, though. It's often preceded by a number of a process of getting to that point, and to recognise that point and then seizing upon it and exploiting it afterwards. So it's not all hinged just around that moment in itself. And this is something that we're exploring through the project that I'm involved in, SerenA, Chance Encounters in the Space of Ideas. I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. So it's recently gained a lot of interest, the notion of serendipity, with regard to its potential to help us to discover information in the digital world. And part of that is about people being concerned that actually it's disappearing. Google claims to be giving us the things that we don't know we need to know. We go on Amazon and we buy a book and we're then pointed to other books that might be of interest to us. So in the physical world, we might encounter serendipity through meeting of people, bringing together of ideas, remixing things and shaping them up in order to come up with new combinations that can lead to innovation. But the CEOs of both Google and Twitter have stated that it's going to be important in the future for interactive systems to give us the information we need to know. We don't know that we need to know. And it's much easier said than done. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Does anybody have a kind of mental model or a description for themselves of what serendipity is?
I think it depends on your expectations of any given situation. Not even talking in terms of being a professional or trying to innovate in your chosen field, but depends on your expectation and your willingness to be open to what's presented to you in that given moment. Sounds almost a bit esoteric, but it's got a little bit of the skills of the individual in terms of being open mentally, emotionally, spiritually even, in terms of what that situation is and what the possibilities are right there and then in that moment. Mm-hmm. That's why I say spiritual, because it speaks of, for me it has a similar language to a self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay, so we've sort of defined serendipity as we're understanding serendipity. That's the aim of what we're doing. We're understanding serendipity and its role in making unexpected and valuable connections between people, information and ideas. So that's the kind of overarching aim of the project. So we kind of think that in order for this to happen, it's necessary for the digital systems or devices that we're designing to have a somewhat detailed or growing understanding of users, the people that interact with those systems and their interests. So we know what users aren't likely to know. But there's a potential problem. The problem that we're grappling with is that in trying to create or engineer serendipity into a system, do we actually kill it? The oxymoron of presenting a device or a tool that has, we say, the potential to facilitate serendipity or support serendipity or create serendipity itself. The act of that, as soon as we formalise it, it probably wouldn't be, maybe won't be perceived by the users that are interacting with it as serendipitous at all. Actually, we kill it. So why has there been a resurgence of interest in serendipity? And that's a question that I'm putting to my colleagues here. And is it that it's disappearing with search in the digital world? And if so, can we actually design it or design for it? And how can we do that? So these are the questions that we're going to explore today. So if I introduce the team to you, on my far left, your right, is Dr Stephann Makri from UCL. On my right, your left, is Diana Bental from Heriot-Watt, and on my immediate left is Debbie Maxwell from Dundee, all of which are researchers on SerenA and take very different approaches to some of these questions, and that's really what they're going to talk to you about today. They're going to describe the kinds of research that they've been involved in gaining an initial understanding of what serendipity, or the process of serendipity, or the methods of serendipity could be through people, and then how we're beginning to formalise our research around designing devices and spaces to support serendipity. So I'll hand you over to Stephann.
So I think that kind of question at the beginning of what is serendipity is a really fundamental question to take a step back on. So yes, there's this need for a kind of individual to be open to noticing what's going on around them and to making this kind of connection. So I started off with the task of trying to figure out what serendipity was. And so I've spent the last couple of years interviewing people, getting them to give me memorable examples of serendipity. And what they effectively did was they told me stories. So they told me stories of their memorable experiences of serendipity. And from those stories, I was able to come up with patterns that can help us to get a better idea on what is a really difficult word. It's one of the most difficult words to translate in the English language. And certainly when I've asked people what it is, you get lots of different opinions. So Clive mentioned happy accident. So the idea of something happy, something valuable coming from something that's unexpected. But there's a bit more to it, because there's that kind of light bulb moment, there's that insightful aha connection that's made as well. And that's something that's missing from dictionary definitions. So because we didn't really understand what serendipity was, my job was to find out. And I'm actually going to, before I tell you what we found out, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's a social story of me experiencing serendipity. And this was from when I was on holiday a couple of years ago, and I always choose to go to rather interesting places. So my holiday of choice was Bangladesh. And I like the idea of somewhere really different to the cultures that I'm usually immersed in. I like the idea of the chaos. But getting things done over there is not the same as getting things done over here. So even something as simple as buying a bus ticket proved to be really difficult for me. So I had ended up in a small-ish rural town, and the next day I had a flight that I needed to catch home. So it was really important to me that I got home, and I needed to buy a bus ticket. I'd already done my research, so I knew where I needed to go to get this ticket. And eventually, after about 3 hours of circling around town and arguments with rickshaw drivers, I ended up in this bus ticket shop. Opened the door, and there were no lights. It was stifling hot. There were people sitting around. I went up to the desk, asked for a ticket to Dhaka. The guy said, well, can't you see? There's no aircon, there's no lights, there's no power. I can't sell you a ticket unless there's power. And so it meant a lot to me to get home. I decided to wait it out. So all I had with me was my mobile phone, and I had a bunch of leaflets that I'd been collecting throughout the day. So I'd hoped that the next day I'd go on a wonderful trip to a mangrove forest. So I'd read in The Lonely Planet that this was a great day trip, and the best way of organising it was from this town. But I'd not figured out a way of doing it yet. So I'd had these leaflets, most of them were in Bangla. I didn't know what to do, and I was thumbing through them, and thought, well, I'll spend some time making some phone calls, see if I can arrange anything. I made a couple of calls, only to the ones with English on the leaflets, hoping that they would understand English because I didn't speak a word of Bangla. They didn't understand anything I had to say. But about 10 metres away from me, there was a guy that asked me what I was doing. So once I'd made the second phone call, he asked me what I was trying to achieve, and he insisted on helping me. So he took my phone, he phoned up, he asked several of them about prices and stuff like that. He even insisted on coming with me to the agency to act as a translator. He did all the negotiation for me. I simply wouldn't have been able to get that trip achieved if it hadn't been for this stranger that happened to be sitting waiting for the power to come on so he could buy a bus ticket for his dad. And so I ended up going on a really nice trip. But there was more than that. You know, he said to me, well, can I take your phone number just to check you're okay? Because every day one person that goes to that part of the forest gets eaten by a tiger, which is startlingly true. And even my tour guide actually decided that my tour guide chickened out halfway through the tour and told me that I should leave, which I'm not pleased about. But it was a very fun tour. And this guy, his name's Rahib, he was just so nice. He phoned and checked on me, he took me around to his village, introduced me to his friends, and I had a really different, enriched experience that I simply wouldn't have got without that kind of chance encounter. And the reason I like this story is because that's not where the story ended. That's where I thought the story would end. And just as I was about to get on my bus, Rahib was seeing me off, he asked me, when is it you're going to come back to Bangladesh? And it's as if he could see it in my face that I was never going to go back there. And then he said to me, I did once try to come to London, you know. And then he told me this story about him being promised by an agency that if he paid them lots of money, they could get him for sure a visa to allow him to work and study in the UK. And of course, that completely backfired. And he told me that he'd now been promised by another agency that this was a surefire thing. And so I realised that I had the opportunity to help him. So I explained to him that the best thing to do would be forget all these agencies, just do it the legitimate way. And I explained to him what that way was. And that's how we left it. He had the right idea of what to do. And then a few months later, I had a message from him saying, hi, I'm in London. So he'd managed to get over, he'd got onto a legitimate accountancy course, and he was authorised to work a bit, and so he could send some of the money back to his family. And he'd managed to do this all the right way. And so we met up and had a laugh about this chance encounter, and have stayed really good friends. So I really like that story, but what the story does, along with all the others from the people that I've interviewed, is we can start to see patterns. So serendipity involves three important things. It involves some unexpectedness, that insightful aha connection, and a valuable outcome. So we can describe it as when unexpected circumstances and an insightful aha moment lead to a valuable outcome. And so that was unexpected for me because I didn't expect someone in there to be speaking English in that ticket office. It was probably unexpected for Rahib because not many British nationals visit Khulna, and I can imagine not a lot of them would sit in the sweltering bus office waiting for the power to come on just to buy a bus ticket. The insight was him thinking maybe I can help him arrange his mangrove forest trip, and me thinking maybe I can give him some visa advice. And the value was our friendship, my trip, his visa advice and coming to London. So we can see how in these stories of serendipity we can see unexpectedness, insight and value. And I wanted to end by kind of posing more of a question I'm answering actually, which is, well that's great, but then how does this feed into the design of interactive systems? So Mel mentioned the idea of engineering serendipity being an oxymoron, and I completely agree with that. I think that once you try and give people serendipity on a plate in an interactive system, you make it much more difficult for them to find the outcome to be unexpected or insightful. So you might be taking away some of that insight and unexpectedness. We might start to expect the unexpected a bit more because we keep getting it from systems. Or we might even become immune to the value that these systems can provide. We get so used to interactive systems helping us to experience serendipity that we're no longer surprised by it, and we're no longer surprised by the value of it. So the challenge that we have in the SerenA project is not about engineering serendipity, but about creating opportunities for people to experience serendipity through technology, and hoping that what we give them, they're going to end up perceiving as unexpected and valuable.
Okay, thanks, Stephann. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's a very subtle distinction between obviously creating the opportunities and the engineering. So where do we actually draw the line in between these two? Because how do you create a project opportunity? Just going out there and having the trip that you did in places that are, but it can also happen here. It can happen where you live, just next door. And what's the distinction of engineering? Engineering, of course, immediately the connotation of the term makes you think about systems, about technology and the role that it has. So are you heading towards two different ways of dealing or coming up with definitions of serendipity? One where the original meaning maybe of serendipity is a little bit more truth to the original, let's say, within the creating opportunities thing. And the second one where the engineering, the technological aspect it's more heavy-handed, if you like. It's where actually serendipity becomes something completely different. And one should accept simply the fact that the concept has morphed into something else. Something which is not serendipitous anymore. So
yeah, I think you're completely right there. So I think that once you do attempt to engineer it into a system, it no longer becomes serendipity. So there's a blog article with the title "Google Ends Serendipity by Creating It," and I think that is what happens. There are still fundamental questions though when you're designing systems about, well then, if we're not trying to engineer it by coming up with clever algorithms that try and figure out serendipity and boil it down to its mathematical elements, what can we do? And there's probably a spectrum of things that we can do, from allowing people to, allowing our users to explore information and make their own connections there, to all the way to another end of the spectrum where we're trying to provide them with suggestions that we hope they wouldn't have already thought of, but might also end up being valuable to them. And I think that we can pitch design anywhere along that spectrum.
So mind you, the money is in the engineering aspect, because that's where big companies like Google are, that's what they're interested in. That's in the developing of apps, for example, which allow you to know that within a certain radius, there are people whom you might like, and you might actually like to meet them. And that's where the serendipity is in that. It's within a certain radius, it's brought in your device, and it's there. It's just for you to, well, you still have a choice. It's still a choice whether to do it or not, obviously. But it is circumscribed within that type of
and that scares me. So there's a lot of money in advertising, but some of those apps petrify me. Even one of the most tame, called Banjo, still allows me to load it up, see a map. It will show me exactly where we are, and it will show me supposedly my Facebook friends in orange that are nearby. But of course, none of them have got any kind of location tracking on, so I don't see any of them. So what it does show me is people that use Twitter that happen to have betrayed something about where they are, something about their location, oh, I'm watching a talk at DCA at the moment, and suddenly I know exactly where you are through data that wasn't intended that way, and that really scares me.
Yeah. I think that probably brings us on quite nicely to Diana and the work she's been doing around user profiling and
user modelling. I've been sort of thinking about how we put ourselves in the centre of the web. So I'm sort of thinking about why there is this increased interest in serendipity from companies like Google, and so sort of why now? And obviously part of it is simply that there are these increasing amounts of electronic information which are available. I remember how I've been doing research for quite a long time, and I remember how doing research has changed. When I started, if I wanted to find out about something, I wanted to find out about a topic, I had to think about that topic, and I would toddle off to the library and go and speak to the librarian, who would then write down some keywords, she would then type them into a computer, and several days or weeks later, photocopies of various important research papers would then arrive on my desk. So this wasn't something I did. So this wasn't something that I did very often, and it was a slow, painstaking, and well thought out process. Nowadays, if I want to find out about a new research area, I simply fire up my computer, start up my search engine, type into Google Scholar or one of any number of other databases, and I have a whole list of research papers which I can download and look at immediately in a vast range of subjects. So the World Wide Web has made a huge difference to what information is accessible. So information in science, in research, music's available. So we can connect to other people via social media. Artists are putting their portfolios onto the web. So there's this vast amount of different types of information which are available to all kinds of people. So those research papers which I could go and ask the librarian for, anybody can now go and anybody can now type into Google, and a large amount of that is publicly available. So we have access. So communities have access to information that we just wouldn't have had access to maybe 20, 30 years ago. And this enables people to bring new perspectives onto that information. So it wouldn't just be it might not just be me as a computing researcher looking at what's going on in the World Wide Web. There may very well be artists and creative people, people who are interested in building communities, also looking for that and bringing a perspective onto that information, which the people who first put that information onto the web, the researchers who were maybe thinking about this computing material or medical science, whatever, would never have thought of when they published that paper. So it's being used so the information is being used by different people in different ways, in ways that are unexpected and have a lot of value for them. A further technological development, which is relatively recent, is that not only do we have the World Wide Web where we can put information up, put it out there, write text about what we're interested in and share it with the world, but there is also a move to create what's called the Semantic Web, where instead of simply having undifferentiated text, we have small pieces of information which are linked together in a way that is meaningful. So we can, for example, so very many people may have created websites to describe different aspects of the city of Dundee, but we can link together all those different sites using the Semantic Web links, gather together all the information about Dundee. We can also link together different kinds of information. So we could link information about a particular event, like this event which is happening in Dundee, with information about the city itself. And I think what is key is that we have different kinds of links. So we can link together things by their geographical locations. We can say the DCA is located in Dundee. We can also link together like things which are smaller parts of a larger whole. So we could say that Dundee is a part of Scotland, and we can link things together according to categories. So we could say that, for example, the DCA is, among other things, it's a gallery, and we can link up these. So these simple links then form different paths that we can follow. So we can follow sort of a geographical path. We could follow categorical paths, and we can, by following these different paths, we can discover new information and discover new connections and links, which bring us to information that is valuable to us and is possibly surprising to us. So if that's sort of where the World Wide Web is, I have this interest in the way that we put ourselves. How do we as individuals and as members of the community interact with the World Wide Web and with the Semantic Web? So we can already create a web page about ourselves and about the things that we're interested in, and put it up on a web service, and other people can find out about us. It's also the case that bits of the semantic web know increasing amounts about us that perhaps we haven't directly put in. But it's generally public information. For example, as someone who's published the occasional paper in computer science, I know that I am part of that. My name is included in the DBLP database, which is a database of publications in computer science. So linked up to the title of the papers, the title of the papers that I've written, the other people who have jointly written those papers with me, and the topics that I've written about. And that's information which is publicly available and shareable. So how can we sort of put ourselves into the middle of this? If we can start off from our own activities and interests and preferences, we can choose to represent ourselves in this semantic way. So we can describe ourselves, and this is formally called a user model, a description of an individual, and we can describe things about ourselves if we want to, where we are located, who we work for, what kind of social and professional context we're in, and we can use that as a starting, this image of ourselves as a starting point for our own exploration of this semantic web. So we have a lab following this afternoon at 2 o'clock called Chasing Serendipity with linked open data, which is really about how we connect ourselves to this linked data. Another use for our user model is that it can act as a guide for us. So by knowing something about us, our user model can act as a guide, showing us points of interest in that great map of data, great web of data. Show us that we can highlight the points that will be interesting to us, and suggest directions that we could follow that might be useful and lead us to interesting places. Can also act as a filter that stops us from being overwhelmed by the vast quantity of information out there that might possibly be of interest to us, but there is just so much of it. It's kind of hard to know where to start. This, of course, the idea of having a model of ourselves, using a model of ourselves to interact with the web, then leads to the question of, well, do we want to share our user model? Because it is very interesting to make. It is an interesting way to make connections with other people. But as Stephann was saying, is it the fact that because there's a little bit of information about me about where I am up through Twitter, does that mean I want to meet? Does that mean I want Stephann to come up and say hello to me? Would I be very surprised if he was a total stranger? Would that be an appropriate thing to happen? So there are questions about. So we can make interesting and useful connections via people, but unexpected connections with people can also be risky. So we may want to keep aspects of this information about ourselves private to ourselves. We may not want to share information with about where I am right now with everybody. So I think we usually like to have control over whether we share information, what information we share, and who we share that information with, and in what kind of context. Is it in a work context? Is it in a social sitting in a cafe context? So I think within the SerenA project we have we have sort of an idea of having the use of building a model of our interests and activities, but making sure that model is open to the user, open to us as individuals, not necessarily something we want to share with other people, but at least something that we want to be able to see for ourselves. I think one of the things that can sometimes be frustrating about systems like Facebook and Google is that they do things, they make suggestions, and we don't quite know why. So why is Facebook suggesting I connect with this person? So one of the aims for SerenA is that we should be able to answer that question. If SerenA does suggest a person, then why is that suggestion being made? And it's important also to be able to correct information about the model. Information about ourselves goes out of date. We move around. Our interests change, and if we have a representation of ourselves, then we want to be able to keep that up to date, to see to make sure that the representation does really reflect ourselves, and maybe even be able to create our own. Maybe even within this model, to be able to create our own ways of navigating, the data, just to say what kind of paths we'd like to follow, and to say what kind of paths we'd like to follow, and then as a way of using the technology to actually to have the technology perhaps trace those paths for us in a way that we've suggested. And occasionally opening out, so occasionally perhaps opening out into things we didn't say, in order to provide us with some novelty, and providing us with different points along that space between narrowing things down to what we expect, and giving us things which are quite unexpected. I think between engineering serendipity for us and letting us make our own path. So I think I've sort of raised questions for people.
So I think putting all of that into context, the project itself is set up to support researchers, but support researchers in making connections. The idea being that obviously as researchers we're operating increasingly in the digital world, as Diana described with libraries. So we have a mixture of approaches, and I think it's fair to say that where once you would go into the library solely to find the information that you needed to know, now you kind of go less. Or in fact, the British Library Catalogue is available digitally for everybody to search through, whether you're living in the Highlands of Scotland or you are in London at King's Cross. You can pop down the road for 5 minutes and have a look yourself. So there are different ways of accessing that information.
Do you, as collectively, ask any questions of the nature of what is the internet? What is it? It's kind of like happens in our minds. Like you talk about models, and we even call it the internet, like it's something like to be looked up to, almost like it's shared anyway. So it has this power and this potential, like a demigod or something. And I keep using esoteric terms because I'm exploring things like that myself. But it's individualistic, but also no one person operates alone. There's always a sense of community. So what is the internet?
That's what I think it means different things. I think it is different things to different people. I think it's different things to the people who put information onto it. It's different things to the different groups of people who use that information. I think it is what we make of it. That's very much it is.
What I found really intriguing is I spoke to Tim Berners-Lee, who is heralded as the creator of the web, and he said that the future of the internet is Semantic Web. I know I'm not answering a question. I just thought that was interesting.
Secret answer is,
Yeah.
you know, it's shooting the breeze.
Yeah, I think it's very much what we make of it, because people can have private bits of the internet that they don't that are within their organisation or within their group, and then they also have the option to make it available, or they also have the option to make it available sort of to the world at large. So it is very much what you make of it.
So, yeah.
Well, I was quite interested you mentioned libraries and the online catalogue. One of the great joys of the archives of the Art College is, of course, we've got a fabulous library, which you can wander around and find all sorts of things. The main library, much larger, but still unusual in that it's an open stack library. And my generation, we would go into a library and you would get what you were looking for, but then you could have a look along the shelf as well. Now that's not strictly serendipitous, because there's a classification system, and I was wondering whether you've been looking at classification systems. You know, a library, I think, is a Dewey decimal system. If you look up a thesaurus, the famous one, Roget's thesaurus, which is an old system, establishing linkages across subject.
Yes, there is quite a lot of work going on to develop thesauruses or ontologies for the information that is on the World Wide Web, and one of the things about the linked open data is that it uses these thesauruses which people have developed. So, for example, if you've heard of Wikipedia, which is an encyclopedia which has been, which people have typed have voluntarily typed in enormous amounts of information about all kinds of, I guess, generalised and specialist knowledge, and then we've derived from this a kind of classification for some of that knowledge, which is called DBpedia, which is beginning to formalise that a little bit. There are thesauri for example, I think probably the medical profession are way ahead of us on this. Medical research have done a huge amount of work on classifying illnesses and symptoms and treatments, and providing that in a computer understandable form, and then using that to classify things like medical images, linking that to medical images, to descriptions of experimental protocols, things.
So go on.
Just that kind of made me think about something. It's quite interesting, the act of looking for something, cataloguing. And for me, serendipity is kind of finding something you weren't looking for, whereas with all these things, it's kind of leading you to stuff that you're kind of looking for very specifically, which for me is two quite different things. I don't know. And it just made me think of where I search for things these days, and yes, it's Google, but I've started to use Pinterest, which you know is a big fad, but it throws up more stuff that I wasn't looking for because it's tagged by people. Like it's not really a scientific process of cataloging things. It's just the random words that people have associated with the picture. And for me, that's been like more in the serendipity sense. I don't know. It's just interesting.
Well, I think you use the word random. I think that's what you should be.
The role of chance.
It's interesting that you say about libraries in the Royal Word classified, and so you're looking in an area that it's in the due system. I'm a librarian, and one of the most popular areas that you can get in the library is if you have a return today trolley, and it's just random, and people love that because it is completely random and it's not what they're looking for. And it's about how could you get that in the web. I think Pinterest is interesting because that does offer an element of that, because it's different people. Again, it's still classified in a way, it's still leading you onto things. You always want to have a shuffle web scenario where you can just mix it all up and bring anything in. But the element that you get from just browsing in a second-hand bookshop or a library, or a jumble sale of things that aren't anything to do with you, can often lead you into much more exciting, interesting developments. And how you can, I know that's exactly what you're looking at, but any system is going to have it inbuilt, surely, to be linking into what they want, or looking at what you're interested in and linking it in, like constantly. I suppose half the battle is that a lot of the time there's a vested interest in commercial organisations of doing that, finding out what you're interested in so they can sell you more stuff. And the more time I spend online now, the more I wonder, God, this little black box that I'm looking at is just being built for me to buy stuff. And leading me on, even everything, Pinterest, everything. Is it just wanting me to want more stuff and want to buy more stuff? And it's about, as a librarian, I think that I want to say to users, look, if you just come in and look at stuff, you might actually find a lot more than you expected, because I don't think you get that anywhere on the web, that kind of proper serendipity.
One of the things I find with my students is that because they have the access to web and almost unlimited references, they spend so much time researching and they don't have enough time to write the essays. So I spend an awful lot of my time telling them how to refine that search, to just look at one or two, and then think about the other papers at another time. And so it can be terribly distracting to me with this information and these serendipitous events turning up, because we are very easily distracted when we're researching.
So maybe I describe very quickly one of the first instantiations of SerenA. So SerenA is a development, a system that we're creating in the background. In the foreground, one of the first instantiations is something that we're calling at the moment, working title, a semantic notebook. And it exists on a smartphone. So it's almost like the moleskin notebook that you carry around in your back pocket, but it's semanticized in that you pop notes into it. You might take a picture, you could possibly do a drawing, and that exists and incubates in that time. So it doesn't give you an immediate search response recommendation. It accumulates information that's yours and that's private, or that's yours to release in the way that you want to. And over time it might be triggered by a location or person or interest, or maybe a goal that you've got, will give you things in a sort of in a way that's potentially slower. So I thought I'd bring Debbie in now to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about designing some of these aspects of and the role that design can play in that.
Just to pick up on some of the discussions that are going on there, I think the line that we have to be kind of aware of or careful of in SerenA is that it's not purely like a random generator. So there is this link back to the user model that Diana was talking about. There should be some relevancy, some kind of chain of reasoning that can tie it back into an interest. So it's not purely random, but also it's not just a recommender system like Amazon Books. It's not just taking bets. It's actually doing semantic leaps between data, and I think that's hopefully where SerenA will sit between these two kind of extremes in a way. And just to go back to Stephann's talking about this model of SerenA as having this unexpectedness, insight and value. Is that the right word? Yeah. And what you were talking about at the start, so I don't know your name.
Dylan.
Dylan. About the fact that when you think about serendipity, it's this preparedness, this kind of open mind, being aware of suggestions and being open to new ideas. And that was partly our thinking about a semantic notebook and a sketchbook is partly a way of doing that. I think a lot of people use, in creative practice and other practices, scientific practice as well, use notebooks or documentation systems. And I suppose traditionally they would all be paper-based, but perhaps some of them are now shifting towards digital. But I think the idea of a notebook or a sketchbook is not just simply that it's kind of dumping it down. It allows for incubation, reflection, and archiving. And I think the interesting thing for me about the idea of a semantic notebook or sketchbook is that the system will never forget. So these ideas that are in there, it's kind of incubating them in the background and feeding into the user model, and then giving you these suggestions which are not random, and I don't think we can attempt to say that they are serendipitous in themselves, but they have the potential, hopefully, to be serendipitous. I think, to me, engineering serendipity isn't possible because it's not a passive thing. I think there has to be a personal, individual response to it and say, this is critical for me at this time, at this space, at this mind frame, and I can capitalise on that and possibly, or probably, take it out from the mobile app and either go and meet the person that it relates to or read the publication and then make these connections between them. I think to say that SerenA in itself is the answer to serendipity is not it, and it's not really what we're trying to do. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my, I suppose as well. I've only recently joined the project in the last 3 or 4 months, so this is all relatively new to me, and I've been kind of doing a catch-up process of trying to get my head around what serendipity is and what it means to me, and I've been reflecting on it in my own practice and my own doctoral research, which was fairly recently. In fact, my whole research hinged upon a serendipitous experience where I was trying to find a study group to work with. I knew I wanted to investigate oral cultures, and I was trying to work with the Somali community in Glasgow, but I was finding them quite hard to connect with because they're quite transient, and the networks weren't in place for me to get connected with them. And by chance, a friend was having a birthday party in Edinburgh in the evening on a Saturday night. Someone at work had told me about the Storytelling Centre in Edinburgh, the Scottish Storytelling Centre, and said, oh, you should go and check it out, it might be interesting to you. So the Friday night before in the evening, I thought I should have a look if I'm going to be in Edinburgh. I could go in earlier if there was an event on. And by chance there was an event on the next day, and it was a workshop, but I couldn't book it online because they didn't have that technology at that time. So I got an early train the next day in the hope that I might get a place on the workshop. I couldn't phone in advance because if I phoned and then took the train I would be too late for the workshop. So it was kind of an idea of fate almost in a way, you know, would it happen? If it didn't happen, that's fine, I'd just spend the day in Edinburgh anyway. But I phoned on the train and I got a place on the workshop and went along there, and it was an incredible enlightening experience for me. A few weeks earlier I'd read a novel, or a kind of autobiography actually, by a Scottish traveller, Jess Smith, and I'd been captivated by it. I felt there were kind of parallels in my own life somehow, and I just thought this is amazing. And Jess Smith was there at the workshop. And within about half an hour of us being there, we were split up into groups, and I found myself in a little kitchen off the side of the main workshop space with Jess Smith and an African storyteller with drums. And we were all there in the kitchen learning an African song, which we then had to sing back to the rest of the group. I don't sing, this is quite a big deal for me. And the whole day was just this amazing day filled with laughter and just opened my eyes to the storytelling community. But the really kind of aha moment happened later in the pub, because although there was lots of talk about storytelling, there was no actual kind of folktale storytelling in that space. But in the pub afterwards, I said to someone, tell me a story. And this guy told me a story, and it completely blew me away. And I realised at that point that I didn't have to go and try and engage with the Somali community, because there was this like ready-made storytelling community completely accessible to me in Scotland that I could tap into. And so that changed the entire course of my PhD. And thinking about it, did technology mediate it? And it did in a sense, because I I use the internet to find out about the workshop, and then I use my phone to book up along the way. But it's still, even though technology was involved, it still required me to engage with that and to take part in it. So the idea of having an open kind of reflective state of mind, I think, is something that's really important, and it's something that we're going to be looking at tomorrow when we're running a workshop in the morning, Design with a Prepared Mind. I think, are there any spaces left on it?
There are about 3 spaces left, yeah.
So, yeah, I was interested. Plug now. I think maybe I'll stop there because we're kind of short on time, I think.
We're almost out of time. So just to kind of round off, the project itself has got almost a year to run, and we now have an understanding of serendipity. We've got a process model that's been worked on, and some of our colleagues who are mainly at the back of the room actually have also been working on understanding of serendipity and ways in which we might think about supporting it through technology and human-computer interaction. So we are really interested in our audience and those that are interested in us as well. We'd be delighted to think about people that have come along today signing up for our newsletter, or to post stories of their own experiences of serendipity. We've got a part of our website where you can actually post a story of serendipity, and there are some postcards up at the reception of DCA with the details of that, but it's www.serendipitystories.net if anybody's interested, and kind of feels inspired and thinking, oh yes, actually that's a really beautiful story and it actually is my story, and I'd really like to give it to the team. We'd really love to hear about that, and so we're collecting stories of serendipity to include in this, and we're going to be doing a number of events into 2013 that some of these stories and other kind of ephemera and artefacts that have been gathered during the research will be made public. We're also working with the British Library in their catalogue, which is why I mentioned that, all to be revealed. But more immediately, if there is anybody that's interested in working with us in a participatory way to start to test some of these technologies and ideas through technology that we're having, also we'd be really open and delighted to hear from you, and especially librarians, researchers, also in everyday life as well. These tools have the capacity to go beyond the kind of academic research and extend into our experiences in everyday life. So just to round off, are there any final burning questions?